using renewable energy with charging is that sun shines during the day and often people want to charge at night. You need to put batteries in between. But with battery swapping, you can take the energy and directly put it in the batteries. When the vehicle comes, you move the battery into the car. Going through and delivering, the good thing with that is they go through and they deploy a lot of vehicles, they drive a lot of miles, so they're great partners. A lot of them have
Yeah.
global footprints. It allows us to expand with them into other countries as well. We build all of our economics assuming you don't get subsidies. So that we stay in business regardless. The subsidies, improve margins and all that, and that's good.
Welcome back to Clean Techies, the #1 podcast for climate tech entrepreneurs. I'm Somil.
And I'm Silas. Each week, we publish the secrets to success from investors, founders, operators, and experts in climate tech around the world. Building a startup is hard. Building a climate tech startup is even harder. But we make it a little bit easier.
We put a lot of effort into these shows, so we hope you enjoy. Don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and let us know who you think we should have on next.
With that, let's get into today's episode. Hey everyone, quick note for you. You're currently listening to the free preview of this episode. If you'd like the full thing, the full shebang, go over to our Substack. That's cleantechies.substack.com/subscribe and become a paid subscriber. Any paid subscription gets you full access to the show on the Clean Techies Substack. Today, we are joined by John de Souza from Ample, CEO and co-founder of Ample, a battery swapping startup. So they are looking to make batteries that can be swapped in EVs. They are starting out by focusing on the commercial market, so commercial trucks. And there's a lot of reasons why, and John gets into that in today's episode. I just want to comment, recording this immediately after doing the show with John, and this really, really energized me, and that's no pun intended there. John is a multi-time exit founder who is back at it again with a very challenging startup. He's been at this one, I think, for over 10 or 12 years now. And just really incredible, his kind of tenacity to go after this. And I really feel inspired by the future that I might be able to have as an entrepreneur someday. Start out with smaller things that are a little bit more manageable and eventually build to something bigger. So I have a feeling you're really, really going to enjoy this episode. John has so much insight to share. There's a lot of themes and kind of lessons that you can apply to pretty much any startup you're building in climate. So enjoy the episode and stick around to the end because it's good all the way through. Thanks so much and enjoy the show. All right. Welcome to the show, John. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, super excited to have you calling in from San Francisco, I guess. Tell us who are you? Just kind of a quick background and a little bit of a teaser on what you're doing today.
So I'm actually born in Ethiopia. My family's born there. Ended up living in a few countries on the way. Finished my high school in Dubai when it was still a desert, and then came over and studied in the US. Been in startups for a long time and currently working on a startup in the battery swapping space.
Awesome. Very good. I guess, rewinding the clock a little bit, tell us, how would you describe your career in broad strokes? Because you have a pretty eclectic career.
I would say that when I graduated from university, I'd gone to MIT, did my undergrad there. It's one of those points where until that point in your life, you spend so much time focused on, it's very easy what you do, you optimize to get good grades. And then graduated and you go through this moment to go, what do I optimize for now? Grades are gone.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that was one time I took the time to step back and say, what is it that I want to do? A lot of people jump and say, I just want to optimize for money or for something else. But I decided I just want to start working on things I care about and I enjoyed. So I actually spent time initially, I did some work on, I worked on a chess machine a long time ago when it was still constantly getting the chess machines to beat humans. Went from there, did my first startup together with my brother in instant messaging. And it was interesting starting that because a lot of people at the time couldn't understand why anybody would want instant messaging. You have email. We did that. It was acquired by Microsoft. Went from there into the financial space, working on real-time trading systems. Got acquired by Merrill Lynch. Went to Goldman Sachs, worked on the investing side. Wanted to see what that was like to be as an investor as opposed to an operator. Enjoyed that and taught me a completely new world of a different way of looking at all of it. Then went back into startups. I did a startup before this one with my current co-founder, Khaled. We did a company in the health space called MedHealth, where we provide tools for people to manage their own health. Got acquired by Merck, and then we started this.
Yeah, I mean, man, that's a lot of different things, and you've done several successful things that exited multiple times. I guess what I'm always curious about when I hear this kind of trajectory is, how did you get started in the first place? Like, why did you have this entrepreneurial spirit, which is very deeply rooted into kind of who you are, it seems.
But I think in a lot of other countries, entrepreneurship is very natural. You can go to parts of Africa, parts of Asia, and people are very, starting small things. It could be just cooking and selling to in the community or trying different things. And it's a lot more natural. And I think the hurdle people think of starting things is much lower. So taught me one thing. One in terms of is if I start something, often people are scared to be scared of what happens when they fail. And I think if you're surrounded by people who care about you and love you, you're not worried about that. So if I fail, that's I tried as long as I tried my best, that's okay. My family's there, my friends are there, and I don't need to worry about it. So it takes me, I think, one of the big hurdles of actually going through and starting is what happens if you fail. And honestly, I think for most people who think about it, they'll be fine if it fails. So you need to put that aside and just make sure you're not trying to do it to show people how good you are, that you're comfortable with who you are, and you have the people around you to go and support you. But where it actually started is, if I go back and think about my first sort of entrepreneurial venture was, there used to be, and I'm going to date myself massively here, but there used to be a magazine called CNVG, Computer and Video Games, uh, which would actually print out the code of a game, the actual listing of the code in the center. So it would come out once a month. And if you want to, you can type in a few thousand lines of code and you have a video game. So my brother and I decided that what we're going to do is type it in, debug it, because you make so many mistakes on the way. But most people are too lazy to do it. So you go through, type it in, get it to work, record it on cassettes, and sell it to other people. And it was so every month it came out. That's our job, was go in, get the code, type it in, get the game to work, and go through. And that gives a flavor of, if you're willing to put in the effort, what you can do.
So wait, just to clarify, you're saying, because I don't know if I understand the tech from that time. You're saying you typed it, but you couldn't just copy paste it into something else. Like you had to put it on cassettes. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, just like you have USB drives, the
Yeah.
USB drive back then was actually audio cassettes.
Oh,
So,
really?
so you'd actually record it onto an audio cassette, and you'd sell that cassette to somebody, and they could put it into that drive, which was, they could read games from these cassettes, the old computers, put it in,
Really?
yeah, and
So
they
it could turn it from that like audio into
yeah,
a game.
awesome. So the way they actually stored it was as an audio sound. You remember the original modems? You'd hear all those funny sounds.
Hmm.
Those funny sounds is how they would transmit data. So they'd actually store the
Mm.
funny sounds on audio tapes and make multiple copies of this audio, and somebody could play that audio back on the computer and get the game to work. So we were willing to put the time in. So we went in. You're typing in a few thousand lines, which is mind-numbing. Uh, but it actually taught us a few things. One is that it actually taught us to code. We learned through code
Yeah.
because all this code. And if you want to debug code, you need to understand it. So we found out that if you're going to get this thing to work, you better understand the code. You better understand how to debug it. So it taught us a lot, and it also taught us a bit. It gives a flavor of what it's like to be an entrepreneur. It also understand that people value different things. We said, look, we can do it once and make multiple copies and do well. But people were just thinking about, I don't waste my time typing it once. It didn't make sense if you're
Yeah.
going to do it only for yourself. But if you can multiply it, it made sense.
Yeah, I feel a little bit embarrassed because usually I come from a pretty retro background, so I usually know at least the concept behind some of these things. That's totally new to me, man. That's a new one. Um, but I guess let's talk a little bit more about the company. So I mean, like, I guess to highlight through your background, so you did a lot of different things, ended up in health tech eventually, but then with your co-founder that you exited that, you decided to build in the EV space. So I guess let's get into it. So tell me, let's talk about the elephant in the room, battery swapping, right? A lot of people say it's crazy, but obviously you're making a really huge bet on it. So tell us why you're bullish on this.
So to battery swapping actually has been around for a really long time. You go online, you can find videos from the 40s and all of fleets of vehicles. They're all battery swappable. In the end, battery swapping is very similar to what you have with gas. When gas, you stop and you move gas physically into a car and you drive away. Battery swapping is the same concept. As you move your vehicle into a station, you physically move the battery and drive away. I think when we started looking at it 10 years ago, we realized that what was going to be the limiting factor in getting gross or large scale adoption of electric vehicles was solving the energy delivery problem. Fast forward, 10 years later, when people hesitate about buying it, they'll give a lot of reasons, but basically it's charging. They are all worried about what they do when the vehicle runs out of charge. The people who buy electric vehicles right now, 90%, if you ask somebody, they have a second car that's gas. It makes a great second car. But we're not going to get massive adoption if it's a second car. It needs to be the primary car. And if we can solve the charging problem, we can get it to do that. So our solution was this: if you can make it very easy for people to get a full 100% charge in 5 minutes, then we'll have solved the problem and we'll get adoption. So we looked at a lot of different things. It's very hard to do it through charging. You need very powerful chargers, which are expensive, hard to do, and efficient. And so we said, let's just go back to what works with gas, that you physically move the batteries into the car.
You know that feeling when you meet someone who shares your vision for the future? It just clicks, like two peas in a pod. Well, that's exactly how we felt when we met Goodwin, who we are proud to have as our sponsor.
Being the first major law firm to set up a climate-specific startup and venture practice makes them exactly the kind of partner we are excited to work with. They realize that there are a plethora of challenges to building climate tech startups, and that's why they have built an entire suite of resources for founders, investors, and entrepreneurs in the space. They even offer several tailored pricing methods. And guess what? It doesn't matter where you are listening to this. Goodwin is a global law firm that you can trust to be your partner through it all. From incorporation to exit, they've got you covered.
Go to goodwinlaw.com and tell them Clean Techie sent you to get exclusive access to startup resources. All right, back to the show.
So basically, you took a first principles approach to it and said, like, this is how other people are doing it, but we don't necessarily think it makes sense because of the restraints that we see now, despite the potential, I guess, infrastructure challenges that we might face initially. Is that correct?
Exactly. And battery swapping has been done before. When we went back to first principles, we came up with 3 things that you had to do differently. The first was, if you go to a car manufacturer and ask them to change the car, it's very hard for them to do. So we said we need to find a way to work with the vehicle without asking them to change the vehicle. So that's number one. The second is the beauty about gas is you put it into a Ford, you put it into a Toyota, it works really well. And so we said we need to be able to do the same thing with the batteries, come up with a battery that somehow is like a universal battery, like a AA battery. You can put into different objects or different vehicles and have it work. And the third is you need to be able to roll out infrastructure quickly and cheaply. So for us, those were the first principles. We put it out there and said, can we solve this? If we solve this, then we have a company. So we start off just tackling those 3 problems.
Yeah. So I guess how did you get involved or interested in the EV space in the first place? EV charging, I should say. Like, why was that of interest at the time?
So both me and Khalid, right, we were both looking at buying vehicles and so let's say electric vehicles. And as soon as we did, we ran into the same problems. We said, I went and I had to upgrade the electricity in the house to put a slightly faster charger. It was going to cost $5,000. And I said, this doesn't make sense. The vehicle costs a lot. So to take long to say, look, we see everybody pushing very aggressively for electric, but there's a big problem that nobody has a solution for and nobody's really solving. So we said, if we can go through and solve it, fast forward 5-6 years, we'll have a solution that really meets the needs of it.
Got it. Okay. So then you decide that you're going to work on this. Fast forward, that's what you're doing. Let's walk through the tech itself. So just to make sure I can recap what you've discussed so far is that you're building something that is kind of universal that can be used with any OEM. You just have to find a way to integrate with them. And then you're going to make it so it's basically like fueling up your car. You drive in, it's going to swap out the battery. You don't have to charge the batteries super fast. You can do it with existing infrastructure in terms of the charging. But then they can drive away and they can use it similar to just filling up their car. So I think that's what we've covered so far. Did I get anything wrong there so far?
This is exactly. I'll only add a couple. One is the same station works across a full range. You could be a small car or be a truck, you use the same station, and it plugs in very easily to renewable energy. Using renewable energy with charging is that the sun shines during the day and often people want to charge at night, so you need to put batteries in between. But with battery swapping, you can take the energy and directly put it in the batteries. When the vehicle comes, you move the battery into the car.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. So the biggest thing I'm always curious about when I hear this, and this is how it was when we first had our kind of initial conversation. I was trying to figure this out is how do you go about building this company? Because you have to convince the OEMs to, like for example, let's just take, I don't know if you guys have a partner you want to talk about or can mention publicly, but can we go through one particular example?
So a good example, I think, with this is initially it's hard to get the OEMs, or I call them OEMs, those are the auto manufacturers. It's hard to get the OEMs on board because you don't have customers, and it's hard to get the customers on board because you don't have any vehicles.
Yeah.
So you're stuck in this horrible cycle of each part saying, get the other party and we'll solve it. So the way we did it is actually we worked with Uber. And Uber we thought was a very difficult use case. They have drivers that drive for really long hours. They're doing a lot of distance, and for them time is money. So what we did is we went through and decided to go through and retrofit vehicles. And we took a set of vehicles, retrofitted it, gave it to drivers, and had them go through and drive it for a couple of years. And that gave us the data, gave us the support, and Uber was a great partner. We were able to go through and say, now let's go back to the OEMs. We have a partner that's used it, that likes it. We have real data. And that allowed us to go to OEMs and say, wow, this works really well. So that broke that. Then we started working with the partners, the ones that we've announced so far. We're working with Mitsubishi Fuso as well as Stellantis. And then start working with them to go through and get the vehicles out there. What's interesting is once you start working with them, and the initial hesitation they have is how much work it's going to be for us. When they realize that it doesn't take a lot of work, we give them something that literally is a drop-in replacement for the battery pack they use. Then they can take a step back and say, does this solve the problems we're facing on a sales side? And it doesn't take them long to find a bunch of customers that are really excited about using it.
Got it. So just to highlight that for people, I think that's a really good theme that somebody else could use is if you have a hard time with your hypothetical buyers, find a tech forward partner like Uber in this case, who is willing to, take a little bit more, let's not necessarily risk, but they're more open-minded, if you will, and then prove out the tech then to get to the other OEM. So then tell us about how this works. So you've designed you'd have to kind of co-design a platform specifically built that will allow them to, instead of having their existing kind of chassis, you'll use your product that can be swapped out for each car. Like, does it have to be specifically designed for each car, or do you guys have just one thing that you sell and they can just integrate this into their design process?
So we have two components. One is we came up with almost like a universal battery. we did modularization to say we'll swap smaller batteries rather than a big battery pack. And then what we do with the smaller battery module is we make that fit into a car by creating a vehicle plate that fits into the car. The vehicle plate has the same shape, the same connectors, the same bowl pattern as the battery in the car. And the EV batteries are pretty large. It's similar, weighs about 1,000 pounds. It goes out from underneath the car. So what we do is we give them this vehicle plate and modules that looks the same as the battery pack they have, and they can insert it in exactly the same way as they would the battery pack that they use. It goes along.
Sorry, just to interject here to make sure I got this. So if I understand correctly, a lot of the OEMs have like a platform that they use to build most of their EVs on top of. So there's maybe only a few different differentiated designs there, but you are making a specific kind of like receptor, basically that part of it they are able to swap out directly for what they're already using. So there's very low friction. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. So most of them may have 2 or 3 platforms that they do. We create essentially a battery pack for each of those platforms. For us, that's much easier because the modules inside it are identical. So all we do is be creating a casing that matches the shape and the structural elements that they need, but the battery modules are the same.
And so across the different car manufacturers, are most of the designs close enough that's really easy to do, or are there like some that are just totally whack in terms of how they're set up? Climate tech founders are taking on a huge challenge. Not only do they need to know how to build a startup, but they also need to deal with hardware, have a strong handle on climate policy, know how to fundraise from diverse investor types. It's a lot.
That's why we made Clean Techies, the #1 podcast for climate tech entrepreneurs. In addition to our jobs, we devote 20 hours a week to producing this podcast for you. This way you can learn from the people who have walked the path before you, learn from their mistakes, and gain insights on navigating this complex journey. If this mission resonates with you, we are asking for your help. It takes a lot of effort and it's not free. If you are already a subscriber and want to help, start supporting us today by going to Substack and clicking Upgrade to Paid. Thanks for helping all the climate tech entrepreneurs like you.
They're very different sizes and shapes, but essentially they're all sort of rectangular and fit at the bottom of the car. So we'll have some that have 12 modules in it. It could have as few as 6 modules in it. So you have a full range of it. But other than the fact that the size is different and sort of strength is, it still in the end fits in as a battery car.
And so I guess how do they typically reconcile the idea of having some that are probably, a bolted in battery that doesn't swap versus having yours? Because I'm assuming they're not going fully to this, right? They're kind of making both cars. Do they have to change anything about their production lines?
So what they do on the production line is, if somebody's ordered a vehicle that's swappable, they put in our battery. Somebody's ordered a vehicle that's not, they'll put in somebody else's battery. That is a change. There is a set of certification we do as well. You want to go through certify it. So we do certification to make sure the vehicle meets all the specifications, is safe. And then it just comes down. The customer orders, say, 500 vehicles and want them swappable, they just put in 500 off our bat. If they don't want it swappable, they can put somebody else's into it.
And it doesn't really affect too much of their actual production line. It's not like they have to have a side, like a whole nother production line just for these ones. They can just maybe route it to a different part and they swap your batteries
Exactly.
versus their exist. Okay.
Yeah, you don't need to change.
Um, and then I guess it's maybe a little bit obvious, but I just want to clarify that even if your infrastructure isn't deployed yet, which we'll get to that in a second, if they have the swappable battery, they can still charge it on their own, correct?
Correct. So they
Okay,
can
so it,
still
it really you just take like all the objections are just like vanished.
exactly. So you can go through and charge it, or you can swap it. So you get both of those, and it gives you a lot of interesting benefits that you don't realize. One is you can choose variable capacity. So when you go to a station, you can decide to want all of it or want less than it. The advantage of taking less is it's cheaper. You pay less for it, and the vehicle weighs less. So it's more efficient. You're not carrying 1,000 pounds everywhere if you don't need 1,000 pounds. So it gives you those benefits. Secondly, is you can keep the vehicle as long as you want. You don't over time have a battery that's degrading. As a
Mm.
new battery, so your battery is always good, but also as newer technologies come, your vehicle goes further and further. So you keep your vehicle for 10 years, and it might go 50% more than when you bought it, which is a nice benefit that you get.
Yeah, I mean that's an obvious downside with the Tesla design, right? Of like baking the batteries right into if I understand correctly, right into the frame, right? So to replace that battery is very expensive, I assume. I don't
Exactly.
know the exact details, but I assume it's very expensive. And this would just allow you to basically, instead of a software update, you can get a new battery update once they have better technology. And that's quite interesting. Okay, so I can see why this became pretty obvious for you as you guys went down this path and kind of figured this all out. I guess I am really curious at this point. What were how much of this did you guys figure out kind of early on, and how much of it took a long time to realize, okay, these concerns are actually not concerns anymore?
So I think the high level concerns we got, we really understood well. Over time, we went through and you saw a lot of smaller things over times that you didn't realize. A simple example is if you're a car manufacturer, you need to keep spare parts for 10 to 12 years after you stop selling a car. So what does it mean for the battery? It means that these battery chemistry changes. When they stop producing the car, they buy a lot of these batteries, put them in a warehouse, and cycle them up and down for 10 to 12 years. It ends up costing them a lot of money to do that. So it is, but with swappable batteries, since at least our batteries are sort of can work with the backward compatible and forward compatible, you don't need to store batteries. You can just use the current technology. So there's a lot of these nuances that we realized over time. We didn't realize also all the nuances of how much static storage costs if you want to use it with renewable energy, or the details of the carbon footprint. But over time, we started speaking to them, and we went through and realized we recently spoke to a fleet that had an interesting perspective on charging. They go that every vehicle has a charging port at a different point in the car. So for a fleet, what you end up having to do is you end up with cables everywhere to reach everything, and that is a massive hazard for the workers. They end up tripping on all the cables, and because the charges are a need to reach front and back, they put it on the side. But they said then what ends up happening is often the drivers will back into and break the chargers. So there are all these nuances you don't realize till later on.
Yeah, that's. I mean, that's interesting. It's good that you guys have seen all this because you're at deployment phase and phase is not correct. Like, let's talk about that. How far advanced are you guys in terms of you have a number of partnerships and you have a number of people putting this in? So tell us about scale where you're at today.
So we have deployments currently in San Francisco and in Japan, and we're starting Madrid as well. So we deployed in Kyoto, Japan. We've been going through and using it, and we have interesting use cases. We start off with a lot of the taxi and corporate fleets going through and using it. In San Francisco, we still have it being used by Uber drivers for ride sharing, and that we'll be launching in Madrid a little later this year.
Okay, great. So, okay, now I want to ask, so just to clarify then, your primary selling is done to the OEMs, correct? You have to develop a partnership with them and then they just basically buy, X amount of this hardware depending on how much they're producing, correct?
Actually, we don't sell to the OEM, so they're a partner for us. The people
Okay.
who actually purchase are the fleets. So the fleet will actually they'll go through and purchase say a truck. They pay for the truck less the price of the battery. So they're paying like 2/3 the price for that. Then they pay us two things. They pay us a battery subscription, which could be a couple of $100 a month or something like that, based on the mileage they're driving. And they pay us a fee for the energy similar to what they're paying for gas. So those are the two things they pay. They buy, and then they buy the vehicle less the cost of the battery.
So you're focused on currently commercial fleets, like small commercial fleets?
Yeah, and we're going
Okay.
after usually big commercial fleets.
Oh, okay.
So going through and delivery. The good thing with that is, they go through and they deploy a lot of vehicles. They drive a lot of miles, so they're great partners. A lot of them have
Yeah.
global footprints. It allows us to expand with them into other countries as well.
Interesting. Okay. And is part of it because they kind of have a business case for it? At some point, I assume your objective would be to also be in the consumer market then?
Yes, exactly. So what we do in the city is once you have stations deployed all around the city, then you can start opening up to consumers. But the initial
Okay.
focus is go to the commercial fleets. They tell you where what the routes are. You deploy the stations for them, and they start using it. And over time, you keep on expanding the number of stations based on the number of vehicles on in the market.
Okay, interesting. This is really interesting. So just kind of put this in perspective for people for this go-to-market strategy. So let's back up a bit. You first find a way that you can partner with people with Uber, like doing some retrofits, right? The MVP basically. Then you go to commercial fleets who have a particular reason. They have kind of a motive to do this in the first place. But you could also then specifically almost build to fit, if you will, the charging networks themselves. Um, and then once you've done that, after a while, you'll have enough that will allow the consumers to use it. But the commercial fleets also allow you the expansion opportunity globally. So there's kind of a double-edged reason to sell to them first. Is that correct?
Yeah, and when we went after commercial fleets and we decided that pretty early, there are a few reasons that went. One is that you sell it before you deploy any of the stations. So you initially sell to them and then you go through and deploy the stations versus consumers you need to deploy and then sell. So being a startup company, in order to being efficient with the money you raise, you can go through, get the customers and go through and deploy it. The second with the commercial is that they know the routes. So they come to you and they tell you where you are versus consumers are going everywhere. So you need a pretty dense network with the consumer versus the commercial, they tell you exactly where you need to go. Commercial as well, you could be selling 1,000 vehicles to one customer versus with
Mm-hmm.
consumers, you need 1,000 customers to go through and buy it. And last one, which is interesting, is with commercial fleets, you can actually go through and finance the batteries and the infrastructure because they sign long-term
I
contracts.
was going to ask that next. Yeah.
Yeah, so it makes it very easy because you go into each year with sort of backlog revenue, and you can actually raise the money needed to build infrastructure.
Yeah, so just to clarify, what you're saying there is that you obviously raised equity funding initially, but then once you get to a certain point of contracts, you can use that as basically proof, and then use much cheaper financing for like project financing for the infrastructure build out. Which I mean,
Exactly.
I get talk about the infrastructure build out because if I understand correctly, the stations you're building, like you'll have to at some point mass manufacture these. So like I assume you're probably at a point where you haven't mass manufactured them yet. You're probably building them individually, but how do you think about that? And will it be, usually when you think of like a debt facility, it's usually for smaller consumer product or at least smaller things, but this is going to be probably some big charging facility, but you'll probably mass produce these at some point as well.
Well, there are two different things. We need to produce the batteries, and we
Hmm.
actually have a fully automated line to go through and produce battery modules. We can go through and produce them at pretty high volume. And then there are the stations themselves. The stations itself, there are parts that are automated and parts that you need to do manual. It's hard to go through and automate a full process. Uh, so for that, when you think about the facility goes together with the contracts you have. So if you get a fleet that wants to deploy 1,000 vehicles, from a debt perspective, they look at those contracts and say you have a high credit-worthy counterparty, so we can go through and finance against those. So it makes it easy to finance the batteries against the battery subscription. It makes it easy also to finance the stations against the energy that they're going to use.
Okay. And when you really started at the beginning, how did you go about this? Did you just use like a third party contract manufacturer to get some of this stuff done? And tell us the whole kind of thought process from how you started and then how you got to this point. When did you decide, hey, we're going to build our own facility for these things versus using some third party?
Thanks for listening so far. To get the full episode, go over to Substack and become a Clean Techies premium member by selecting any paid membership. Not only will you get access to hear the rest of this episode, but you'll get access to exclusive interviews, our monthly show, the best, most relevant insights from our shows, and access to our premium community.